Hello, everyone. My name is Nicholas Lamar Suter, and this is The Rundown. Joining me today is Zandring, and we're going to talk about what is going on in Israel. It's a little complicated. It's complicated. We talked yesterday about the mounting protests. It's been really extraordinary, and essentially reached the point where we were looking at either an ousting of Netanyahu in possibly what you could call a revolution, so essentially a revolution. If the military joined, you would see a coup, and now we are possibly looking at a civil war. So what has changed and what is causing these dynamics? I'm going to give you a brief rundown of the basics of this. Xander and I will then sort of discuss it. We'll also get into the live chat and we'll cover where we are and what we're expecting. So Benjamin Netanyahu has been prime minister for 6 terms, and he has always been a conservative. He's been on the right. But in his last election, he was actually originally expected to lose. And one of the ways he won, and stop me when this sounds familiar, is he started courting members of the extreme right, and his party allied with, now this is a parliamentary system, which means essentially unless you have the majority all by yourself in one party, you actually have to make alliances with other parties until you have a coalition that represents a majority, and then you can go about the business of governing. He chose for that coalition members of the extreme right, and that made it easier for him to get into power. However, he had to make a number of concessions.
Okay, you can stop.
Oh, it sounds familiar now.
You said, yeah.
Yes,
stop me when it sounds. I was actually going to stop you, but then you started talking about the parliament, and I was like, well, I guess I won't stop him right on the parliament thing. I'll let him get through that. But no, as soon as you said started courting members of the extreme right, I was like, okay, we can just stop right there. Yeah, that's really, where have I seen this movie before?
Yeah, and I think the U.S. is going to experience some of the very issues, because when we look at the deals that were made in the U.S. in order to get the Speaker of the House in, we're going to talk about that, because Netanyahu essentially made very similar deals with the far right, including but not limited to revamping a number of the rules for, I was going to say the Constitution, but let's talk about the Israeli Constitution a bit too. Israel does not have a constitution. As a country whose formation was somewhat more formal than most other countries, you'd think they would have a constitution. They don't. They have a series of, quote, constitutional laws that sort of comprise roughly what is considered the Constitution, but it's not a single document, and it's not codified in writing. There's a number of generally accepted principles, but that's essentially it. So because of that, one interesting thing is the Supreme Court in Israel becomes extraordinarily important. The reason it's so important is without a constitution, they become sort of the arbiters of what really is and isn't legal. There's no set constitution to fall back on. So the Supreme Court there has more power than you might otherwise expect. The far right in Israel have decided that, well, this is not really tolerable anymore, and they have decided that the court is sort of out of touch with the people, and they need to rein that court in. And that is what this is all about in a nutshell. So what has Netanyahu's government proposed? Well, there's been a number of complaints. Netanyahu did try to get a minister in that was a far right minister, and the court blocked him. He then attempted to override the court, and that almost came into a constitutional crisis that was averted when he finally acquiesced. But he started a legal proposal that's been winding its way through the courts over there, and there's in fact a couple of these proposals. Netanyahu, as it turns out, is on trial for corruption, bribery, and a number of other very pleasant things. And there's already been a legal process started for removing him from power based on a law that says that you can, and let me see if I can find the exact framing of it, but essentially that it's kind of like a no confidence, except instead of done as a parliamentary vote, it's a bill, and that bill essentially is a proposal to have him removed by the Supreme Court, have him removed from office for, what was it? For corruption, I think it was the charge. So he proposed a law that made it a lot harder for even a successful conviction of corruption to actually get a prime minister out of office. Now, he has said that this law is obviously not self-serving, that these are his firm beliefs and have nothing to do with the fact that he is currently serving trial for corruption. Nonetheless, for some reason, most people don't believe him. He has then added a whole bunch of other proposals.
Say it ain't so. No,
I know.
No way. It's not possible.
He's added a whole bunch of other proposals, and the proposals actually come from his party, which is the Plurality Party. It is the largest party, but it is not a majority without hardliners. This party is the one that is they're often called the majority party. They are, if you think of them as the coalition, they are not if you think of them as the party as a whole. Regardless, they also proposed a number of things. Now, the Supreme Court is picked by a 9-member council. They proposed that 9-member council actually be distributed very similar to how Parliament is set up. What this would do would give any majority party majority control over the Supreme Court, since that 9-member council would be determined by the Parliament. If that happened, that would mean his party and or his coalition, depending on how you choose to look at it, would then have a majority control not only of Parliament, but of the Supreme Court. And in fact, going forward, any majority would be able to control both. This seems to undermine the principles of democracy and checks and balances, and is actually one of the central complaints that they have. Also, the ability to remove judges and the ability to override judges' decisions from the Supreme Court, which previously had been considered impossible. The legislature cannot override, the executive cannot override, and he proposed changing that. This would give both him and his majority party effective control over all branches of the government, and in a way that if there's a way to wrest that control from them, I can't tell how. That is why we are seeing protests. The most proximate issue that started yesterday was the firing of the defense minister, 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐜. 𝐒𝐤𝐬𝐜 was in strong opposition to all of these changes. He has made that crystal clear, and he was doing everything he could to block Netanyahu from successfully passing these changes, and he was in fact successfully, to some extent, at least slowing Netanyahu down. He is no longer in Netanyahu's way. That happened last night, and now we see this, and we're going to cover sort of what has happened in the last 24 hours, because it really has been extraordinary. But with luck, you have an essential primer to how and why we are here. He is no longer defense minister. The argument from the Netanyahu camp is, look, the Supreme Court lost touch with the citizens of Israel a long time ago, and they don't really have much of their own review, and so we must have them responsible to the legislature, to the point of being able to be removed by the legislature and vetoed by the legislature if we desire, because, again, they are out of touch with the public. A cursory glance at the public suggests to me that the public strongly disagrees with this position, but that is nonetheless Netanyahu's position. The position of the public is that he is attempting to become a dictator and take over the entire country. I tend to be in the second camp. Thank you, Titan. What has happened since? Well, 100 pilots from the Air Force have resigned, saying that they will not work for a dictator. We are seeing reports of resignations in all levels of government, resignations in various diplomatic institutions across the world representing Israel, most notably yesterday, the New York Council of Israel. We have seen over 24 mayors of different towns in Israel declare a hunger strike. We've seen the highest count I've seen is 800,000, but it appears to me like they've broken 1 million by this point. Protesters on the streets. We've seen Netanyahu's own residence overrun and evacuated by the police. Netanyahu has done something rather interesting. He has decided to compromise and has said that he will compromise. The compromise that he has worked out is as follows. He will postpone all of these changes until, I think he said October. He will postpone these changes, at least for a while, in exchange, giving the Prime Minister of... it was the Prime Minister of Security, and let me get his name because his name is going to come up more than once. Itamar Ben-Gvir, giving Mr. Ben-Gvir his own security detachment of a paramilitary organization that would report solely to him and appears, in principle, to be above the law and doesn't report to any governmental or political organization other than the national security minister. Now, this is the national security minister, meaning where the military operates abroad, he has the right to deploy forces internally. He can't deploy the military internally, in theory, but he could deploy this security force internally. So, what Netanyahu has said is my negotiation, or my compromise is we will do this later, and in exchange we will get a very large security force right now. That was not agreed to by anybody. He has not entered negotiations with anybody. There is no general representative of this group other than perhaps the defense minister, and this was the first the defense minister heard of it. I suspect giving him his own group. Now, Ben-Gvir is one of the far-right extremists. He is to the right of Netanyahu, which represents, in my view, a paradox in the space-time continuum, but someone can explain to me how that's done. He is to the right of Netanyahu, which means he is very much for getting rid of I shouldn't say getting rid of the Supreme Court, but certainly putting in a great deal more controls over it. And he is one of the champions, the strongest champions of all of these changes. And he will be getting, according to Netanyahu, they will be creating for him as part of this compromise, which, again, nobody agreed to. He will be getting a security force that appears to be equipped to handle the protesters. So that is, in general, what we're looking at. The entire country is on strike. All the unions are on strike. Hospitals, universities, everything is on strike. Everything is closed. The airport has been closed. Roads are closed. Barricades have been put up. It's obviously a extraordinarily difficult situation. Now, I had said earlier, we were looking at a revolution, overthrowing the established government, at least the prime minister. It looks like that is slowly coming off the table, and we're looking at a civil war. What is a civil war? Well, Yarli Levine, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and let's see, I think it was Bezalel Smotrich, who is the finance minister, and the justice minister. So the national security minister, the justice minister, and the financial minister have all come out and said everybody loyal to them must now start counter-protests. So you are talking close to 1 million protesters, a proposal for counter-protests, and a dedicated security force while the military waits and everybody's waiting to see what happens. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the final step you see before violence erupts. A lot of people are extraordinarily upset, it appears to them, and I think that's because they have a brain, that this is more of a power grab, and he's using this as an excuse to build his own private military force, since the regular military seems to have some hesitations about firing on civilians. So how far he's gone into drawing up this force, we don't know, but he has started immediately building this force. We don't know how long it's going to take. We don't know what they're going to do. But we do know that in the meantime, there have been calls from his party and from the coalition to immediately start counter-protests. We expect to see it tonight. The people who are for this still represents a minority. I don't know how many there are, and I don't know how many of them are interested in going out when there's basically 1 million people in the streets, but I do think we're going to find out. Is Andering, what are your thoughts?
There's no way this can't go wrong in any way, shape, or form.
Oh no! This is the model of stability. I'm perfectly fine. I'm betting on the Israeli stock market like tomorrow, if there is one.
Yeah, I mean, come on, build your own private army. Trust us. We won't use it badly.
Yeah.
What is the rest of the quote? If men were angels, governments wouldn't be needed. I don't remember the rest of it though.
Well, there was no rest of it. He was stabbed in the back before finishing the quote. Well.
Yeah, it's a hell of a mess, and the only saving grace, I guess, if you want to look at it this way, is the fact that the far right is in the minority, and so I can't imagine a lot of people are going to be keen to start up that counter protest with facing off against hundreds of thousands of people. I don't see how that one gets going. But the proposal of trying to draw up a unaccountable and kind of shadowy security force that isn't answerable to anyone, doesn't have oversight, really. Or at least if it does have oversight, it's by one person. It's like that sounds like every bad dystopian movie and novel I've read in the last 10 years. No, that's one of the keen steps that happens. It's a mess, an absolute mess. And they've set up a big powder keg, and all of the steps have been taken to ignite a true civil war. And all it needs now is the match to be dropped. And that's what we're waiting to see if that happens.
Yep. And I'm genuinely fucking impressed it hasn't been dropped yet. I've gone over reports from ABC, CNN, CBS, Reuters, and the general consensus is people are quite shocked at the restraint that has been shown so far, but for overrunning his home. Was looking for pictures of his house because I keep wanting to say except for the destruction of his home. I don't know that it's been destroyed, but if they overran it, I have a hard time believing the house is still there anymore, but I don't know for a fact it's been destroyed, so I can't say it. But yeah, it's they've really gone out of their way, and we've shown some photos, and we've got the video here of the police engaging. It's actually, the police engagements have been reasonably small. And one reason, by the way, is they don't have enough police to stop 800,000 people. So, the police, I think, are very limited. And if counter-protesters start, my suspicion is that's the way they're going to do it, which is all the counter-protesters, they have to be really fucking organized. And the government will help with that. And if they're smart, they say, okay, come to, whatever Capitol building or whatever, and counter-protest in front of that. They set up a perimeter for the regular protesters, keep them 100 yards back, and then set up the counter-protesters inside that perimeter. Illegal, immoral, unethical, and sounds to me right along the lines of what these guys would do and is what they should do if they're going to try to maintain power here. But the military has already said that the government has lost complete control of Israel. So for all intents and purposes right now, there is no government in Israel. There is a government. It's still running. Nobody's listening or doing anything, including but not limited to the fucking military. So for all intents and purposes, the government doesn't exist. The question is, will they find a way to fix it so that the people can be reconciled and they're happy and they go forward and the government can continue, or does the government really get overturned? And where there's no actual written constitution, a lot of this is far more fluid. I mean, it means, we've talked about this. What does it mean if the government fails? Well, it doesn't mean Israel is wiped off the face of the earth. It means that they have to rebuild the government and hopefully spare as few lives or save as many lives as possible in doing it and build something that's stable. Does the country get renamed? Unlikely. But they could if they wanted to, and you're talking about basically a new system. And we're going to see something between a complete overhaul and a few tweaks, what we don't know yet. But, yeah.
Well, starting with an actual written constitution that can be referred to. And I mean, one of the things that I thought was very nice about our constitution was they recognize that sometimes it needs to change. Politicians can get out of touch with the needs of the country or the times. Same thing with, the Supreme Court. We hear a lot of people talking about, we've got extremist activist judges right now on the U.S. Supreme Court. And it's like, yeah, but in the United States, we have an ability to stop the Supreme Court cold in its tracks, pass a constitutional amendment. And they don't have that ability in Israel because none of that stuff's been laid out. There isn't anything really official. It's like, well, what they consider official is just what the Supreme Court says is official, and and I can see that being a bit of a problem. But the recommended solutions tilts the thing from being a slight problem in one direction to being a terrible problem in the other direction. And it leads straight to essentially a dictatorship. You have the ability to come to power and then control all of the branches of government. And if you don't like something somebody else is doing, you can just get rid of them or overturn it. That's a really dangerous precedent to set. And I think that the people of Israel are a little more awake about exactly what's going on. And they were like, wait a minute, no, we're not allowing this. This is not good. We're going to go out and we're going to stand up and say no. I mean, I think it'd be amazing the kinds of things that you could stop our federal government from doing, especially if you don't like the evil Republicans in charge and they're doing, really stupid things. Excuse me. The American people can stop it very quickly by just, standing up in very large numbers and simply saying no. And that's what the people of Israel are doing. So kudos to them. And the response has been kind of frightening from the governmental response. Has been frightening that he's willing to double down and literally risk a civil war over it.
Well, as somebody on the left, I'll confess that organizing in great numbers for doing anything other than really shouting at people is never been our forte. Yeah. So, no, I think that's a good point. The Supreme Court was still operated as a regular court, meaning their job really was to interpret the laws and what was or was not constitutional. But because there wasn't a constitution, or still isn't, that does give them broader authority. But they still couldn't write laws. They still couldn't, they still had at least some checks and balances from the legislature. But yeah, they had certainly more power than ours does. But again, and I think you're right. I mean, reform was obviously needed. I think this was not reform. This was knocking the legs out from under the Supreme Court, and again would have allowed Netanyahu to basically stay in power even after being convicted of bribery, corruption. I forget what the other one was. It wasn't money laundering, but it was some other. I mean, he's got a list, and he'd still be able to stay in power, and he couldn't be removed after that. That's a dictator. There would be essentially no means of removing him, but to wipe out his coalition, which could still maybe be done, but it's becomes a tremendous amount harder. And it was really designed to keep it so that coalition could stay in power forever. So, yeah, it's all right. So we got a couple questions. Let's see. I think you said something about having lost the. All right. Okay. I'm not sure if that's for us or not. So I'll let that. Go from. How long do the Supreme Court members serve? I almost said it's a life sentence. It's a life term, but there's caveats. You can still be removed, and you have to leave at retirement age, which is 70. And I think there's one other. You can resign. You can be impeached and removed, and that process it's a lengthy process done by the legislature. Or you retire when you're 70, you can't continue past 70. So those are the ways to do it. Now, this would have added another way. You could be removed by some other process that the majority could do. I forget what it was, but the legislature could basically do it without having to take a vote and without having to go through a whole process. The other thing that they added was, I think, what was it? I actually think the council, I forget whether it has 30 or I want to say, I think it's 30 people on the council, and that council determines it's 30 people on the council. They determine, they nominate judges, and then they have a judicial selection committee. Once the judges are approved, that's it, they're in, and this would basically say that the selection committee is, for all intents and purposes, run by the majority party. Were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to mention you did miss one way to remove a judge, and that's by death.
Yes, that's true too. Yes. So thank you. That is, if they die in office, they are obviously removed. So,
no weekend at Bernie's here.
Yeah, no. They have strict. In fact, I think that's actually one of the constitutional laws is that you're not allowed to get drunk and take two young boys and pretend that any member of it's not just they thought ahead. It's not just judges, but any member of government has to be alive with a verifiable heartbeat. You can't just the marionette thing. That's like 1800s. They don't let that happen anymore. All right.
No zombies or vampires either. No heartbeats.
No zombies. Yeah, exactly. So so that's where we stand. So if you're just joining us, we're not just going to do rundown after rundown. In fact, this is going to be a reasonably short show. We wanted to give you an update. Things haven't colossally changed. I think the creation of a paramilitary organization that is running at the behest of the Minister of Security, Interior Security, I think that's extremely bad. I think the calls for counter-protesters is extremely bad. That is adding gasoline to this fire and significantly elevates the chance that this is going to turn into a full-blown civil war. If I were on the far right, I would not want a civil war. They are in the minority, and by a significant amount. Even if you take the coalition into account, it's a coalition. Not everybody in that coalition is on the far right. In fact, the far right is... he aligned with the far right just because he needed that number of votes to put him over the top. Many in the coalition don't like it. And in fact, his own coalition called him out. Yeah, not his own coalition, the Likud party called him out yesterday, saying that this was essentially an unacceptable power grab. So so now what's going to happen is we have to figure out how much of the Likud party is going to revolt over this, how many of them are on board, how many aren't, and then what's left in the total number of far-right extremists and how far they're willing to go. You have to realize, and we said this last night, he's got nothing to lose. At this point, if he surrenders, he will be found guilty he's going to be found guilty on the corruption charges no matter what. Bribery, all that. And as a public official, he's going to jail for the rest of his life. He could possibly now be tried on sedition, treason, any of those things. So he either wins this or best case scenario, he's in jail for the rest of his life. Worst case scenario, I was going to make a poor joke about determining which religion was correct, whether Jesus was actually the Son of God or not, but I think I will. Of course, by even saying that, I will stop trying to offend every single Abrahamic religion on the planet and just say that he's the best case scenario, he's in jail for the rest of his life. Worst case scenario, he's dead. So he's got nothing to lose at this point. Other members of his party and the coalition have a lot to lose, but so far they are doubling down. And that's where we are. So any other thoughts?
I mean, the whole situation is very serious. Some, seriously bad things could happen. Hopefully, good things will happen. Kind of up in the air right now. Don't really know we have to just see what's going to happen and watch. I'm shocked that this is actually happening. I mean, about the only way I think I could be more shocked is if this was happening in the United States. And kind of in that shock and disbelief, it's like I almost find parts of this funny. It's not. what, when he puts out his proposals, the very first snide thing that comes to mind is, oh yeah, because that's not Pinochet at all. Yeah. Like, yeah, that's going to really work out for everyone. Let's try that. How to be a dictator 101.
I'm really curious if he actually believes that BS, or he knows that he's full blown, at this point, dictator. And I mean, again, the number of resignations in the government at this point, the government is collapsing. Right now, it has zero efficacy. It has zero control over everything. They're not making any governmental decisions. There's no legislation going on. Right now, for all intents and purposes, there is no government in Israel. And everything's shut down. I mean, everything is shut down. You can't get a taxi cab. God forbid you have to go into the hospital. Everything is shut down. So, right now, we're going to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. So my question is, does he sit there and say, well, this is mine and I'm entitled to run and own, and this is my country and I will run it the way I damn well please? Or does he say, can't these people see that I'm trying to help them? This really is a judicial or judiciary out of control. I mean, I'm always curious about that. There's no way to find out because I can't get in his head and you can't trust a word he says. You can go somewhat by the actions, but the reality is he wasn't for these plans until he brought the far right in, which actually that gets to where I wanted to go, which is this is exactly what happened with the Republican Party in the U.S., bringing in, at first it was the Tea Party, that morphed into MAGA, and then now you've got the Speaker of the House giving away almost all of his power explicitly to people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are incapable of governing, but they can bring the government to a grinding halt. So the U.S. government is now held hostage largely to these people who don't understand how a bill becomes a law. Agree, disagree, going too far? Gone too far, Nick. Yeah, okay, no, you know what? Okay, sorry. No, that's cool.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Zendering's back.
You always go too far.
All right. Tonight, the role of Zandering
actually
will
kind of agree with that.
So tonight the role of Zandering will be played by Nicholas Lamar Suter. So Zandering, what do you think? Nick, I think you're the best host on YouTube. It's a thrill and a delight to be here with you, and I have to say, for the most part, you're always right. Well, thank you, Zandering. I don't know that you have to go that far, but, really do appreciate that. If you mean it, are you sincere? Oh, absolutely, Nick. I would never lie to you. There you go. You're back. Okay.
Hey, I'm back.
So you
it feels like I never left. Conversation just kept right on rolling.
Well, that's what the mute button is for.
I dropped my headset, but I was still able to talk.
Every time I hit the mute button, it ends up. I think Titan's rewired the board here because I got a little board here and I can hit the mute button. Okay, so I'm gonna hold on. I'm gonna mute Zandering. So here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1, and my shield is down.
Aww.
My mic on. My mic's on.
Bummer.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh yeah. Well, that's because I made sure the mic goes around the shield.
That's about the only way to shut you up.
Well, it is basically a mic failure. Yeah, it turns out that the mic on my shield actually bypasses the shield. It only is cut for all of you guys. So I instituted that when I realized somebody was messing with my board. Well, of course, now that I've said that, Titan's going to go in. And he's going to cut the audio on my board. I know it. I shouldn't have said anything. All right. So okay, we had a couple of questions.
I think,
yeah, please.
Just in response to one of the things that you were talking about with you kind of wonder, it's like, oh, it's all mine and I could be able to run it any damn way I want to, or can't you see I'm really trying to help you and this really needs to be done? And and probably a dozen other things. I think it's probably a combination of all of them. I don't think that motivations like that are so one-dimensional. I think that unless you're Trump, and then I have a feeling that Trump is far more one-dimensional than just about anybody else we've had, but even his motivations are probably still multi-dimensional, just a lot fewer dimensions. So
this is why I got to let you talk, is because you're like, oh God, what does it say? You're the reasonable one in the group. Anyways, I'm sorry, you were saying?
I just that, and I really don't like Trump either. But it's kind of shocking. Like I said, I didn't even think to mention to you, hey, did you notice that Israel seems to be blowing up? Because I was just like staring at it, going, wow, that's a thing. And just not really processing exactly what was going on. So I think that the next probably few days are going to be pretty critical to find out whether they rescue this from civil war or if it actually devolves into civil war.
There's two questions in the live chat that, well, there's three or four. I can resolve most of them to two. All of them are based sort of on one principle. We'll get to that one in a second. First, there was a question on compromise. How do you compromise with extremists? I'll take that a step further and say, how do you compromise with evil? Is Benjamin Netanyahu evil? I'm not there yet on him. I don't like him. He's a fascist. Fascists are general evil, I suppose, but he's not evil in the same way yet that Putin is. Could he get there? Yeah. So how do you compromise with evil? And the problem is sometimes you have to, and that's a very hard pill to swallow. We've spoken with Commander McMillan on that one a lot. I have a very hard time with that one a lot. In my view, Ukraine shouldn't stop until the Russians are completely expelled from Ukraine, all the original borders secured, and Russia pays reparations. The chances of that happening are pretty close to zero, and there's a lot of reasons for that, not the least of which is Russia does have nuclear weapons, so NATO's not going to jump in and enforce that. And if NATO doesn't, Putin's perfectly willing to just keep throwing bodies at this. And if they expel all Russians from their land, which is actually now a distinct possibility, I think that's actually on the table now, which is impressive as fuck. If they do, he can keep sending missiles at them for the rest of eternity. He doesn't have to stop 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. He can keep doing it. He can keep killing their civilians. He can keep bombing their cities, and stopping him is a really tough issue. So if he says, give me a part of the Donbass and I'll leave and never come back, can you trust him? No. Is he going to come back? Yeah. But parts of the Donbass actually wanted to be part of Russia anyway. There was a bit of a civil war going on in some of those areas, and if those are the areas, and if they genuinely want to go, is that a compromise that they can take? I'd have a hard time with it there. I wouldn't be able to ask anyone there to do that. Having said that, if it's a choice between taking that compromise and just having your civilians murdered for the rest of eternity, you may have to make some tough choices. I don't know how they negotiate. Right now, there is no negotiation. So long as Netanyahu's in power, I don't think there's a negotiation. Once he's out, either they negotiate with the party in power, which becomes a lot more moderate, but is still on the right, or complete civil war and or revolution. One of the two has to happen. So then the question is, how many Israelis are they willing to sacrifice to start a revolution and hope they pull it off better? That's the question. And then you're just going to get people on both sides saying it's worth a compromise and others saying, nope, let's start again. I'm sure we'll get it right this time. Maybe they will. Who knows? So that's the first question. The second one is, do you think that the military staying out of it has saved lives? I'm going to pass that one on to 𝐒𝐤andering. 𝐒𝐤andering, what do you think?
Possibly. And possibly not. It's a little too early to be able to tell for sure. I think at this particular moment, the military not mobilizing to disband all of the protesters probably did, or at least saved injuries, possibly lives. But if this actually does come to an actual civil war and they actually start fighting each other, unfortunately, when you're fighting a war, if it actually gets to that point, generally the least casualty intensive way to win it is to overwhelmingly crush the opposition immediately. So if the military had gotten involved and put down the rioters, even with some small loss of life and numerous injuries, if the alternative was civil war, where instead of hundreds of thousands of people protesting, hundreds of thousands of people end up dying in this clash between the two sides trying to control the government, then the military not getting involved would have cost lives instead of saving lives. So I think it's a little too easy or too early to be able to tell, and we probably won't be able to know the final analysis until it's all said and done as to whether some of these decisions are good or bad.
I tend to agree. I think that I think at least so far, by not getting involved, they've saved lives because nobody's shooting anything yet. If the military gets involved, there's going to be bloodshed and violence, and so far there hasn't been. But yes, there was a question so what about the IDF? Right now the IDF is sitting on the sidelines, but they've acknowledged that the government has lost control and suggested that the government damn well better get control again pretty quick. But they're not involved yet. One issue is there's no legal way to get involved. That's why this is kind of a constitutional crisis. Netanyahu is, I think, irrefutably about to become dictator of Israel and run the entire country by himself. That's his goal. He is within, I was going to say earshot of it. He's within a mile of it. He can see it. He can smell it. He's almost there. So removing him legally is very difficult at this point because there's no mechanism other than the ones that have been attempted already that go through the Supreme Court. And first of all government business is stopped. But second of all, he basically has challenged that in the Supreme Court and is trying to get rid of them rather than let them oust him, which they presumably were eventually going to do after they went through the legal process. He's trying to beat the legal process to the punch. So it looks like the legal process at this point cannot be continued. So how do you remove him legally? The answer is probably you don't. Do you do it anyway? Probably. But that's why the military is waiting, and the military isn't supposed to be operating inside of Israel. So the IDF so far is in the sidelines. Yes, Netanyahu is apparently starting to or attempting to build his own private military. It's actually going to be the private military of the internal security defense minister, but he is essentially in Netanyahu's pocket. In fact, he's a little to the right of Netanyahu. And he is behind all of this stuff. He's a big fan of these things. So, if that military force enters, then you've got a question. At that point, you have Netanyahu attempting to stop a revolution and using violence. Can they stop 9 million people? Well, that's assuming all of Israel. So can they stop however many are willing to really fight for this? And it may be as much as 2 million. If that's true, I don't see how they stop it, but there's going to be a lot of loss of life. If the military enters, which side do they enter on right now? Everything I've seen suggests they're going to enter on the side of people. That turns this into a coup d'etat. And it's a coup d'etat because you have the military overthrowing the duly elected leader of the country, despite the fact that I think they kind of regret that decision now. So I think that answers your question. I hope that answers your question. Anything to add, amend, or anything you think I missed?
No, not really.
All right.
Everything is still really up in the air as far as, where exactly is this going? So far it's gone in not very many good places. But again, swords, hands. We're about to have another hand.
There's a lot.
On the other hand, 9 million times 18 million hands. So that's a lot of hands. The willingness of the people to stand up and say, no, this is not okay, we're not going to allow this, may, in the long run, actually save Israel. If they hadn't said anything, had the protests broken up quickly, and Netanyahu been able to push through all of the things that he wanted and essentially became a dictator, we could have ended up with another fascist dictatorship. And then where do you go from there? How many people are they going to get killed? Because history shows us that fascist dictatorships tend to kill a lot of people. So, it may seem like such a tragic thing to be happening, and it is tragic. It may be the lesser of two evils at this point, though. But again, it's really hard to make any of these determinations without foreknowledge. We really can only look back on these and say, okay, well, now we can kind of connect the dots of what led to what and what was good and what was bad, and was this ultimately good or not? We're going to have to wait and see how things shape up.
All right, so I think so. The question is, what are we looking at going forward? And yes, last night people brought up some questions, and we've been trying to sort out what we can guesstimate from what we know so far. So the first question is, how does the U.S. fit into this, and how does Palestine fit into this? This is pretty much an absolute good for Palestine, and there's a couple of reasons why. They are going to keep their mouths shut, I think, because this is one of those, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth. They're going to stay out of it. They don't want to be seen as interfering. Worst case scenario, Netanyahu wins, gets an iron fist control over this government, and Palestine's in very, very big trouble because Netanyahu is, I think, determined to wipe Palestine off the face of the map. But they were headed that way anyway, and this isn't going to, this will slow him down at least, because he's going to have to rebuild his internal organization before he can start really being a thorn in Palestine's side. So at worst case scenario, they're kind of back to where they started. Netanyahu will have, amassed almost total control, but he was going to do that anyway. So Palestine hasn't lost anything and probably gained at least a little time. So that's worst case scenario for Palestine. Best case scenario, Netanyahu is gone and the far right elements are gone. That means a more moderate Israel that is more willing to work with Palestine, and so that is also good for them. So I think they're sitting back waiting, and they're not going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. Where's the U.S.? The U.S. is not in a bind yet, but they could be, and so I think the U.S. is watching very carefully. Israel is an ally. I would like to think that Israel is an ally because that's the right thing to do. I don't think that hurts. I think a lot of people consider that when they're trying to support Israel. So as Xandring pointed out earlier, there's more than one reason we support Israel. But because it's the right thing to do, I'm not convinced is even the majority reason. We need an ally in the region. Israel is a staunch ally and willing to become a staunch ally, and they need our help. So we have, a very strong ally in a region that we have a lot of interests in. So, there you go. All right. Well, what's Israel? I don't think very many people can tell me what's Israel right now. There seems to be some dispute over what is Israel. If Benjamin Netanyahu calls up and says, I'm fleeing the country and I'm seeking asylum, the U.S. has a very serious problem. In general, we're supposed to accept asylum seekers, and this is Benjamin Netanyahu, the former head at that point, presumably, of Israel, or the deposed head of Israel, or in absentia, perhaps he's going to claim I'm still the head of Israel, but there's been a revolution, so until I tidy up that little mess, I'm going to govern from D.C. However it plays out. They can't really say no, because he's the head of our strongest ally in the Middle East, and everybody there knows him, and most people have met him, shook hands with him, and it's hard to shake hands with leaders in the future if every leader thinks that you're going to abandon them as soon as they get into any kind of trouble. Having said that, if you take him, and a new government is formed in Israel, the first thing they're going to do is knock on Biden's door and say, excuse me, you're holding someone who's doing Israel for a trial, please return him. And that puts the U.S. in an extraordinarily difficult position. Jimmy Carter was in this position with the Shah of Iran. He decided to keep the Shah of Iran. That had profound consequences that actually we'll be discussing somewhat tomorrow. We're going to have on a revolutionary tomorrow. He is on the front lines engaging with police in the fight in Iran, the attempted revolution that's happening there. We're going to be discussing that with him tomorrow. But suffice it to say, just about everything that's happened in Iran hinges on the consequences of Jimmy Carter's decision to protect the Shah when he fled. And it destroyed Iranian U.S.-Iran relations all the way through to today. It was that profound. And whoever the current president is, if and when Netanyahu seeks asylum. But we're not there yet. The U.S. is watching because we could be there. But right now, Netanyahu seems to be wanting to stay at all costs. So what is the future? Depends on who starts shooting first, depends on how many bullets they've gotten, it depends on who's willing to compromise where, what, when, and how. One thing that I think is, at this point, completely off the table. I don't think this is going to stop until Netanyahu's out of power. I don't think it's going to stop until so. His so-called compromise and other compromises, if he is in power, this will continue. When you have mayors, or is it mayors? Yeah, mayors on hunger strike. When you have simply sitting there going, oh, my bad. Did I just try to overthrow the judiciary? No. That was a typo. I was like, no, I wanted to give hugs and kisses to the judiciary. You see, it's all of a sudden. That's not going to work. That is not going to work. I don't see this stopping as long as Netanyahu's in power, and there are people in there who are so deluded they don't see that, but the people on the edges have already seen it, and they're getting the fuck out of Dodge. So, what's next? Either somebody in his own party says, okay, a lot of people are going to start dying, let's arrest him. We'll hand him over to the opposition party and or to jail. We'll just do all the legal processes, and then we're just going to go on as if none of this happened. That's a possibility. I don't know how to ballpark it. I guess 40%, and I'm just guessing that because I think it's less than 50, but I think it's still reasonably high for that. What's more likely is the security forces of some kind are going to be established around Netanyahu. Protesters are going to have to make a decision. How seriously do they want him out of office? I think the answer is at all costs. I don't think they were joking when they said that. I think that means their own lives. I think that means the lives of security forces protecting them. I think they will do everything they can to avoid it, but I don't think they're going to stop. So that's going to force a question of how or if the military is going to get involved, and that's when things are going to get dicey. But that is my prediction of what's going to happen. Now we're going to discuss one or two other things. Quick reminder, we're in the process of really trying to grow the channel, sister channel. I think we've done a good job here. I hope you feel we've done a good job here of running down exactly what's going on, how we got here, why this is about the judiciary and everything else. If you think this is informative and you know people who want to know more about it, I hope you'll send them the link. It helps your friends, it helps you, it helps us. So please consider sharing this, like, subscribe, and come join us on the Discord. Believe me, right now this is about all we're talking about. We also do have tomorrow, from Inside the Revolution, we're going to be talking with a revolutionary who has been fighting with the government and the police of Iran for quite some time. We're going to talk about how the most recent protests started, what's going on, why he's doing, what he's seeing, what's happening around him. It's going to be a extra long show. There's no way we can do this in an hour. It's a 2-hour show. Tomorrow is Andrew and I, so I hope you will join us for that. We don't know on downtime or anything else yet. Our schedule is up in the air for a number of reasonably obvious reasons, and it looks like we may not have Commander McMillan available. So we're gonna sort out. We still have Starsky scheduled for Friday, and we have a charity stream that will be donating to the UN relief for refugees from Ukraine. That will be coming up in a couple of weeks, but we're talking about it. You can learn about that on our Discord, and I hope you'll consider looking into that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to have a lot of people here, and B, it is for a genuinely good cause. So, having said that, I will give everybody a chance to get in a last question or two, especially if I've missed one. Make sure you tag me. Isandering, I've sort of given my prediction. Do you think that prediction is reasonable? Do you have any predictions? What are your concerns, fears, hopes, dreams, aspirations? Well, okay, that's going to go for a while. I know you. That's going to go for a while. So let's just go.
My hopes, dreams, and aspirations. Let's just get to the good part. Isn't that one of those TikTok short songs now? Can we skip to the good part?
Yeah,
I have
think it is, yeah.
no idea exactly what's going to happen. I do. I mean, I can't ascribe like, oh, I think it's maybe this kind of percent likely. I really don't know. I think that if there are security forces put in place like they're trying to do, and that they then try and use those security forces against protesters, I think and if they're doing so, especially if any kind of violence breaks out, I don't think the military remains neutral at that point. So I think that is one of the things that would probably bring the military in. Right now, they're staying out of it because there's a bit of a conflict. I mean, these are countrymen and women that are standing up and saying, no, this isn't right, to political leaders, yet those political leaders also ostensibly control the military. And so it's like, well, we've got a conflict of interest here. So we're doing nothing. And we're going to, one of the reasons why in a lot of Western countries they specifically prohibit the use of military inside of the country is to stop instances like this. So that the military literally can just stand back and say, hey, we can't operate inside the country anyway. It's not legal for you to order us to do that. And, we're not going to, it's like, we're not getting involved in this mess. But I think that if there's a valid threat against the population, I think that they would step in to protect the population. But that's just kind of my impressions of the military in general. Otherwise, until I can kind of sort of see where, do the protests keep going up? Do they keep shutting the country down? What kind of pressures are going to build? And I want to know where the weak point is, what's going to fail first. And that's going to give us a much better idea of where this is headed towards. Once we start seeing things buckle and fail, that's, from the pressure, then that's going to give us a good idea of where to look. Otherwise, I'm just like, I'm watching and hoping that it doesn't all fall apart, because Israel does have quite a few animosity, or groups that are that have animosity towards Israel. And if Israel starts really coming down and gets embroidered into a civil war, I can't help but think that some outside forces may decide they want to get involved in that. So keep a close eye on it, and we'll see where it goes.
That's something I hadn't considered. Egypt probably won't, but there are countries here who are sitting there going, if we march a military in right now. Having said that, very little galvanizes people more than feeling attacked. It may end up, my suspicion is they'll wait, but that's a genuine concern I hadn't really considered. So.
Yeah, but here's the issue. If they actually get embroiled into a civil war, there isn't a functioning government. You've got the military protecting the civilians, you've got security forces, and they're clashing, and it's actually come to, like a genuine, I hate to say genuine civil war, because it's not ungenuine if they're not shooting each other in mass in the streets. But if that ends up happening like that, there isn't a functional response. Yeah. There isn't a functioning government. There's no coordination. There's no real chain of command. And Iran decides they're sending in their forces in there to just essentially try and make good on their promise to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. There's a very difficult time trying to get everybody pulled back, organized, reoriented towards the threat. I mean, there's something called an OODA loop, and every individual generally goes through it, and countries can go through it in mass as well. You have to be able to observe the threat, then orient to that threat, then you have to decide what you're going to do, and then take action. And that process takes time. And the larger the group that has to go through that, the longer it takes. So, that would be my worst kind of case scenario, is that we see a complete embroilment in civil war inside of Israel and outside forces, not even governmental, but there's many groups out there that would love to take a bite out of Israel. And they wouldn't really care if that bite ends their civil war, because they can take a hell of a big bite before it all ends. So whereas at the end of a civil war, there's still, Israelis there, and they're going to rebuild a government. And so that's kind of the worst case scenario that I see. But we really got to just watch and see where the cracks start to form. And then we can get a better idea of maybe what to expect. Because right now I'm still just going, I can't really believe they're doing this, and let alone get a good deep dive analysis and going, oh no, we got a 38% chance of this happening because of this. And it's like, I'm sorry, I just don't follow Israel that close.
So let's see, Liam Wakefield, I predict that the future, that the further I look ahead, the worse my predictions will get. Yeah, that sounds about right. I predict that no matter how often I make bad predictions, I'm going to continue to make predictions and put a great deal of stock into them. Doorknob Head, I predict there will be change in the future. That's very helpful. Thank you. Thank you for that.
At some point, to some degree, somewhere.
I like that prediction. I think that's reasonably accurate. Probably, mostly. All civilians of the military. This is what makes the Israeli Defense Force is an incredible organization. They take their defense extraordinarily seriously. Men, women, everybody's in it. You're required to serve. I thought it was 2 years. Somebody earlier said it was a year and a half. But everybody who's on the streets right now have already served their time. What that means is everybody knows somebody who's in the military. Everybody has been in the military. This does mean that the military is a little less likely to engage the population because all of them have been at some point in the military, and all of them are prepared to shed blood for Israel. So, but that also means that there's a tremendous amount of loyalty, and so to have their military, which is one of the most disciplined and dangerous fighting forces, man for man, on the planet, to have them refuse an order. And at this point, we still don't have official confirmation, but there was a senator who suggested that indeed they're aware now that the military has refused several orders to either protect elements of the government or to engage the forces, engage the protesters in some areas. That's astonishing. It's legal. It's the only action they can take. But in Israel, the unique relationship of the military to the people, all of this is, it's an extraordinary situation. So, 2 years for women, 3 years for men, plus reserves forever. Yep. All right. That sounds about right. So, thank you for that. Okay. So now I know. All right. So, I'll tell you, we are making
a quick question about nukes here.
Yes.
It says, does Israel have nukes? Would they be in danger of being stolen if another country gets involved? The short answer is yes, Israel has nukes. The long answer is no, Israel doesn't have nukes. Israel does not own its own nuclear weapons. The U.S. forward stations its nuclear weapons in Israel. Are there any there right at this moment? I am not sure. That's generally pretty classified, though there have been nuclear weapons stored in U.S. nuclear weapons stored in Israel in the past. And would they be in danger? Theoretically, they would be in danger if another country decided to try and invade an embattled Israel. Realistically, probably not, because if there are nuclear weapons there, and if there seems to be any credible threat whatsoever to those nuclear weapons by, say, Iran, or maybe ISIS or some other group decides they're going to go in and just start wailing on those on the Israelites, the U.S. military will move in and will remove all of those nuclear weapons very quickly. They will secure the bases and make sure that nobody can get into those bases. And Israel has already agreed to allow the U.S. to do that. So, no, I don't think that there's any realistic chance of nuclear weapons falling into rogue hands and then threatening the rest of the world with them.
I'm going to agree, but for different reasons. Yes, they have. I'm going to switch it. The short answer is no, they don't have nuclear weapons. The long answer is yes, they do. The official position of the United States is that Israel does not possess nuclear weapons. This would be a violation of the non-proliferation agreements that the U.S. has signed in attempting to limit the number of nuclear weapons in the world. Having said that, the U.S., we know for a fact, gave Israel either nuclear weapons or the ability to make them. It is believed that they have 7 nuclear weapons in their capacity that they could, in fact, deploy. This was seen as, by the U.S., a necessary, the only way that Israel could actually keep people from invading is if they have nuclear weapons. There are people who say, well, this is just a rumor to keep Iran from invading. To the best of my knowledge, and it's been a while since I've gone into this, but this was a hot topic, I think, about 2 years ago. To the best of my understanding, it is generally accepted by every single country in the world that they really are a nuclear power, and that the U.S. Gave them that ability in violation of the non-proliferation treaties that we have with a number of other countries. So, and to the best of my knowledge, nobody's really objecting to it. But they do have them, but the only way we would give them to them is if they were going to be secured. So I agree that they're secured. I agree that there's no danger of them going anywhere or falling into anybody's hands. But I do think they have them, and my understanding is that the general consensus is that they own them. But the U.S. denies any and all of that. And it's possible that that's untrue, but the last I checked, the assessment was absolutely they have them, and I suppose it depends on who you believe. So, and my thinking is that they've got them. Now I forget. I haven't researched it in a very long time. But in either case, I think we're in agreement that they're going to be safe. So I wouldn't worry about it.
If they do in fact have them, they are going to be very safe. And I'm with you. I'm pretty sure that Israel has nuclear weapons stored in its country.
Yeah.
And I believe that the U.S. gave them to them.
Yeah, there's definitely, yeah. So I think we're in agreement. There's nukes there from the U.S. So, all right. And I think they have the technology to make more. I don't think they are making more. I think the U.S. has been pretty clear that they're not going to make more. But
maybe I'm wrong. I don't believe they have the actual ability to enrich uranium that extensively. And they don't have. I don't believe they have the ability to use any of the other more powerful nuclear weapons. So I don't think they've got those kinds of facilities set up, which is why I believe they're U.S. nuclear weapons, because they don't really have the facilities for that, unless they're top secret and have absolutely not a whisper of it has gotten out, which I guess could theoretically be possible. But they have the knowledge of how to do it, and they could spin up their own nuclear production plants fairly quickly.
Yep. I think we're all in agreement with that. So, all right. So what I think we should do is join us on the Discord. We're going to be following this, like I said. And so, somebody had talked about the predictions. Yeah. So we've given you what we always do here on End Time, which is we tell you what the facts are. We try to make the most educated guess of, if not where things are headed, at least what the possible avenues are. We've talked now about the difference between a revolution, a civil war, and a coup d'etat, and we've shifted in the last 24 hours to which is most likely, but there is still no way to know. Again, the only prediction I'm willing to make that I'm going to stand by is they will not accept Netanyahu. There's going to be a settlement somewhere. There's going to be an agreement unless they completely overthrow the entire government and start from scratch. At some point, there's going to be an agreement, probably at least with the Likud party. Members of the Likud party may defect, and that may make it easier, and they may be able to have early elections. So we'll see. But at some point, somebody's going to have to negotiate and say, okay, here's what we're willing to do to rebuild the government, get out of the streets. I do not see any negotiation that's going to end this peaceably that is going to have Netanyahu in power. So either he solves this with violence or some other such thing, which I can't think of, or he's gone. I don't see anything but those options, and the question is, what's it going to take to get there? So, all right. So again, please do like, subscribe, share, and Sinister Porpoise, 8-month members. Thank you so much, Sinister. It is good to see you as always. Down with authoritarians. Could not agree more. Thank you so much, Sinister. Thank you, Azandering. Appreciate having you on as always. Are you looking forward to tomorrow?
Yes, I am. I was actually kind of annoyed about the trailer breakdown today because it really kind of screwed with the very carefully laid out plans I had to be available and in service area for tomorrow. But I should still be able to get unloaded in time, and everything should still work out. I'm very excited for this.
Good. I think it's going to be a good show. I've spoken with him already. He has he's seen some things. He's I like to think it was before he was talking about getting shot at from a hovering helicopter with a machine gun. It was before that I was able to discern that he might be a good interview subject. But after that, I was like, oh yeah, we're getting him on. So it's going to be a good show. I hope you guys will join us for that. Again, please like, subscribe, and share. I think we did a good job. If you agree, share it with people you think need to understand this more. We're going to keep doing updates every night so long as it's important, and we're going to go to breaking if something really big happens. We're anticipating breaking on this. We're anticipating breaking out of New York on the Donald Trump indictment. So we're following a lot. And if you like, and if you ring that bell, you will know when. If you check on the Discord, you'll also get notifications. Appreciate all of you for coming out and for giving us some really good questions in the live chat. Thank you for all of your support, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we have on Alex, a revolutionary in Iran, currently fighting the Iranian government to try to free his people from the Jesus, what's the name of a religious? It's not a caliphate, but from said government. Thank you all for joining us. See you tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern, when we have our discussion with Alex. Have a good night.